presentations for us today. In terms of introductions, we anticipated it might be a larger group because it's a manageable group. I think everybody can introduce themselves now. Ainsley, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay, great. So I'll start off. I'm Alicia Capizzello. I'm Deputy Public Defender for Baltimore City with the Maryland Office of the Public Defender. I've been in this leadership role for about 2.5 years, but for the almost 25 years preceding that, I defended young people in juvenile and criminal courts in Baltimore City for the Maryland Office of the Public Defender. Defending young people has been the greatest privilege of my career, and while my priority has been litigating cases and standing next to them in the courtroom, I've also had the opportunity to engage in fairly extensive stakeholder work at the citywide and statewide level with the Annie Casey Foundation, the Mayor's Office, the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services, and been able to engage in some legislative advocacy as well. So I hope to serve you well in this particular capacity, and I'm very happy to be with all of you this morning. Susan, I'll toss it to you.
Okay. My name is Susan Levitin. Can you all hear me? Okay. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland Law School, and for 48 years, I ran a children's law clinic where we represented kids in abuse and neglect, juvenile delinquency, and special education. So I saw how race affects who gets served by which agency. And I also was one of the founding members of Advocates for Children and Youth. And so for around 20 years, I worked with the legislature trying to change policy and laws for children. And I'm very excited to be part of this commission. Thank you.
Josh, would you introduce yourself next and then toss it to somebody else in the meeting for introductions?
Happily. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm not a member of the commission, but I'm here as an invited guest. My name is Josh Rovner. I'm the Director of Youth Justice with the Sentencing Project. We are a research and advocacy think tank based out of Washington, D.C., though coincidentally, I live in Silver Spring, Maryland, so I've taken a real great interest in what happens in our home state. And I'm really looking forward to presenting today. Nate Bayless, I think, would be a great person to go next.
Hi, Josh. I'm Nate Bayless from the Annie Casey Foundation. I am the director of our Juvenile Justice Strategy Group here. I am excited to be part of this work group committee. I never know what we're called. I guess we're work group. And I also am chairing the public education, co-chairing public education and narrative change work group as well. I sit on the Maryland Equitable Justice Collaborative, where I'm one of the co-chairs of the Justice group there. And I previously was on the Juvenile Justice Reform Council back in 2020 and 2021. So I'm really glad to be part of the commission, but really this work group as well. So I'm looking forward to it. I will pass to Jeffrey.
Thank you. I'm Jeff Zubak. I'm the Director of Research Analysis and Evaluation at the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy. We are legislatively mandated to collect 2 legislative reports related to juveniles charged as adults. So that's why I'm participating in this work group today, because we have a participation to share some of that data with you all. I know you're all very anxious to see what we have. And I'll throw things over to my colleague, Brianna.
Good morning. My name is Brianna Irwin. I'm a statistical analyst over at GoCap. And as Jeff was saying, we'll be presenting our information related to juvenile charged as adults data. So I'm just joining for this meeting at this time. But I'll pass it off to Aubrey.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Aubrey Gearhart, and I am Maryland's Title II Compliance Monitor, tasked with monitoring Maryland's secure facilities to determine Maryland's compliance with the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act under GOCAP. And I just want to thank Ainsley for sharing this meeting with me. I'm excited to listen and learn and see if there's any connections between the work. And I will pass it to Megan.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Galloway. I am a relatively new addition to the team in the Office of the Secretary at the Department of Human Services. I'm working on the policy team primarily. I most recently came from federal government, where I was in the executive branch, and then before that with Congress, both in the House and the Senate. For quite some time. So I'm excited to work with you all and to dive in on this very important issue. And I will pass it over to Denise.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Denise Henderson Johnson. I am a 20-year employee of the department, but I am also the president of AFSCME Local 3167, and we represent the employees of the agency, and I also sit as a vice president on the council board for Council 3. And I'm glad to be here and to be included in these conversations. Thank you.
And thank you for introducing yourself in the chat. Judge Weathersby, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to the group?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
I'm having such problems with my monitor that has my camera and my microphone. So hopefully it'll maintain itself. I'm Judge Weathersby from Howard County. I imagine we're giving kind of a reason why we're here. I was a prosecutor in Howard County for a long time. The last bulk of time, I was the chief of the Juvenile Court Division of the State Attorney's Office. And then I was, after being in private practice for a period of time, was a magistrate in Howard County for 10 years, where I sat on juvenile delinquency cases and SINA proceedings, as well as other things. And now I am a judge at the circuit court. Certainly have a passion in regard to the youth and their treatment and services and the process of the court system entirely. So very happy to be working on the commission. And I look forward to the work that we'll all do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Secretary Schiraldi and John, would you introduce ourselves? And then I think we've all met each other.
I am Vinny Schiraldi, Secretary of Department of Juvenile Services. I am in what we call the dungeon in Annapolis right now, so it's sometimes it's a little funky getting coverage down here, so hopefully that'll cooperate. And the issue of case processing is a really serious one for all of us, I think, and it's going to need cooperation from every part of the system. I see over and over and over again, kids pick up charges, they either get detained or released. The cases take a really long time to process, then they pick up another charge and another charge, and by the time they do get adjudicated, if they do get adjudicated delinquent, they've forgotten what they've even gotten adjudicated for, and we've sort of let them hang around out there without either rehabilitation or accountability in a way that I don't think serves anybody's interests. I was just literally came from a meeting with Chief Worley in Baltimore at our headquarters for our electronic monitoring. And we were using one specific case to watch a kid go through the system. And, we're looking at literally minutes. The kid didn't, left his home when he wasn't supposed to. The monitor did what the monitor was supposed to do. It told us. We pinged the kid 6 times. We called him. It's all recorded. we let the court know, right? Those are our jobs. And so now everybody knows, the police know, the court knows. 6 weeks later, we get a writ issued on the kid. Like you'll hear often, oh, a kid did a new reoffense, something, DJS must have done something wrong. And if that, broke that story, people would come to us. Of course, we wouldn't throw anybody under the bus because we're not supposed to be talking about individual cases anyway, but we wouldn't want to throw anybody under the bus. That's not the way it should work. The way it should work is we should have groups like this help us figure out how these cases should be processed more quickly without, of course, throwing away any of the kids' rights to due process. That can happen, and I think we really need to get there with this group.
Thank you, Secretary. John?
Yeah, hi, I'm John Irvin. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation at the Department of Juvenile Services. I'm lucky to work for an agency that is data rich, and we're able to support initiatives like this with a lot of data on complaints in the juvenile court, what we do with those complaints, placement, supervision. One blind spot that we've had over the years is youth charges adults because they're not part of our system, and we've been working more closely with Jeff and his team to try to build the capacity for the state to analyze that data. So I'm really excited to see what he's bringing to the table this time.
Thank you so much. So Susan and I are going to make some very brief introductory remarks about our vision for the work group, and then we'll delve into the two presentations. I think Secretary Schiraldi provided us with some wonderful introductory remarks. In addition to those, I would just offer that, our goal for this work group and our charge is to make recommendations to the commission as a whole. And the way we see those recommendations as falling into two buckets. Some recommendations we'll make will be directed squarely at state agencies that are part of the executive or other local agencies about how to amend, change their internal practices. And then some of those recommendations will be how agencies should work differently and better together. The second bucket of recommendations, as we see it, is to recommend that the commission get behind legislative changes when we think legislative changes are called for. When we were thinking about how to organize the work of this group, what made the most sense to us was to roughly go through the experience of a child chronologically, to take on the life of a case chronologically. Again, roughly. And so one of the first processes that a child is thrust into, one of the first processes that is implicated is the determination of jurisdiction, whether a child will be charged and prosecuted criminally and as an adult in the adult criminal system or as a child through the juvenile court system. So we thought we'd start there. We thought we would edify ourselves first, of course, before even thinking about any recommendations. And so today we have for you two presentations. The first is by GOCAP, an overview of Maryland youth charged as adults. And Jeffrey and Brianna will be presenting to us. And then we have a presentation and a question and answer session led by Josh Rovner of the Sentencing Project. So I'm going to kick it to Susan in a moment. I think we're asking that folks hold questions until the end of the presentations or place them in the chat. We also want to gently remind everybody that our meetings are publicly streamed. So I'll just say that as well. And Susan, what would you like to say before we launch into our presentations?
I just want to reinforce how important what we are doing. I think a lot of emphasis is always put on the laws, but in reality, it's really the processes and how things actually happen. And I don't think enough emphasis is ever put on that. So I'm really looking forward to finding out how in real life things occur, and then talking about how we can all work together to make that work better for kids. So again, thanks everyone for being here and participating in this. And now we turn it over to our speakers.
We're up first at GoCap. Okay, I can do. I'm going to do a very high level overview of kind of the juveniles charges adults data collection, and then Brianna's going to dive into more of the data. We do have one of our dashboards we already have up on the website, so we can dive into that a little bit too. Just so I'm aware, how much time do we have for this? Because I could talk data all day, so I just want to make sure that I don't go over the allotted time. You're muted. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just asking Ainsley if she could address that because I don't think Susan and I thought about the length of time. I think that was dealt with by Ainsley and Bethany for each presentation.
No worries. I think about like 20 minutes. And then I believe like the sentencing project will also have 20 minutes, and then I'm sure that we'll have a lot of questions. So
sure. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Ainsley. So very high level, there's actually 2 legislative bills that require our office, specifically the Maryland Statistical Analysis Center, to collect data on juveniles charged as adults. The first bill, we've been collecting data going back to 2013 that we received from the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services through their CJIS data. And then more recently, there's a bill that passed about juveniles charged, convicted, and sentenced as adults. So you're going to get an overview of what's required in the data that we've collected so far, some of the limitations with the data so far, because I think one of the takeaways from this is we have some key findings, but we still don't know the full picture of youth that are charged as adults. And then we have a couple slides about where we intend to go with this. And we've been working very closely with John Irvin and his team as well, so that we really try to capture all of the data on this. So I'm going to pass things over to Brianna, who's going to dive more into the data elements.
all right. Thanks, Jeff, and thank you everyone for having us join you today. This is our presentation about youth charged as adults. As Jeff was describing, we have these 2 requirements. I had it up on the screen when he was talking to have a little bit of a visual to provide with it, just to break it down a bit more in terms of the information. So the 2 requirements we have are for juveniles charged as adults and for juveniles charged, convicted, and sentenced as adults. The juveniles charged as adults goes back longer. This is from Chapter 252 of 2002, or House Bill 943, requiring that we get information from DPSCS through CJIS to report on the juveniles charged as adults. And the second is from Chapters 41 and 42 of 2022, or House Bill 459, and it requires that we report and analyze data on juveniles charged, convicted, and sentenced. And for that, we're getting information from law enforcement agencies, the Administrative Office of the Courts, local correctional facilities, and the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. Looking first at the juveniles charged as adults, for this requirement, we do have data from calendar year 2009 through fiscal year 2024, and on our public-facing dashboard, we provide data from 2013 through 2024, and the data that we collect are the charge description or offense, the arrest date, processing date, county, and offender demographics, including their age at arrest, race, and sex. And using information on the charge, we're able to identify the exclusionary offenses and the violent offenses. For the exclusionary offenses, those are crimes for which a juvenile must be charged as an adult due to a combination of their age and the nature of the crime that was committed. And that's dictated for our purposes by Courts and Judicial Proceedings, Article 38A03. And for violent offenses, those are being determined using Criminal Law Article 14101. Here we have a static image of the dashboard that's available on our website, and I'm happy to either share that in the chat with the group or it can be sent out later on as well. Anyone is able to view this dashboard. It sets to a default of the most recent state fiscal year. So here we're seeing a screenshot from 2024, and it's providing that information that was just described. Here we have the portion that are violent offenses, if we look in the top left, followed by exclusionary offenses, a breakdown of what different charges or crimes were taking place that juveniles are being charged as adults for, followed by how many were within that year. And if you were to expand this beyond what is set as the default, you will see this over a greater time period. And then we have it broken down by those demographics, where we have offender age, offender race, and offender sex. And at the end of the presentation, we will go to this dashboard so you're able to see the interactive capabilities of it.
If we have questions, should we hold them till the end, or do you want us to ask as we go along with this?
I will say, please hold them till the end, so that way we may answer them as we go about it, and if not, please just take note of it to ask later.
Yeah, there are limitations of this data, so I'd rather cover the limitations, because if there are questions about what this is showing, I think the limitation slide will really shed more light into it, and then we can certainly answer the questions then.
But before limitations, we will turn to the findings of the data. So this slide is specific to findings from fiscal year 24, looking first at demographics. So there were 832 charges filed against juveniles charged as adults in fiscal year 24, and 95.1% of those charges were against juveniles aged 16 or 17. 91.3% were charges against male juveniles, and 81% were against African-American juveniles. Looking at those three different demographic groups, 70% or 659 charges were against male African-American juveniles who were age 16 or 17. So they made up 7 out of 10 charges. The most common charge categories for the year were firearm possession, assault first degree, and armed robbery. And across those three groups, that made up over 60% of the charges. And the most common jurisdictions were Baltimore County, Prince George's County, and Baltimore City, which also made up just over 60%. Looking at a longer time period, this is information from fiscal years 15 through 24, when we saw that 85.2% of charges were for exclusionary offenses, and across that complete time period, that amount was always falling between 80 and 90%, with the lowest at 81 and the highest at 89. And the most common charge categories were armed robbery, assault first degree, and firearm possession. These are the same categories we saw for specific to fiscal year 24, and it's just in a different order that's varying across the different years, but still maintaining those groupings.
And these are kids not being convicted, but being prosecuted as adults. That's the 85% of kids, or 89% of kids prosecuted as adults.
They're being charged as adults.
Charged. Okay,
it's
great.
One of the limitations we have, which I'll get to on the next slide, but we don't have that kind of information for this data set.
This is just charges, Vinny. That's one of the limitations with the data. There's no way for us with this data to know how many charges could be associated with the same youth. We just have their the demographic information. So it's possible that a 17-year-old Black juvenile, sentenced on whatever date it was, July 1st, there were 10 events. We don't know if those 10 events are corresponding to the same youth or if that's 10 different youths. So that's definitely a limitation with the data.
Yeah. The last part on this page, sorry. The last part here is looking at how those number of charges changed across time. So in fiscal year 15, there were 746 charges against juveniles being charged as adults. And in fiscal year 24, there were 932. So we did see nearly a 25% increase across that time period, with it going up and down a bit across the different years, where you did see higher and lower in some different periods. In terms of limitations, as Jeff was just describing, the data are by offense, so we do not receive anything at the case level or the individual level. We are not able to determine if a charge is being committed by the same person or taking place in the same case. Since we do have information related to arrest date, county, and different demographics, we can see if people who meet the same characteristics for those 4 variables are matching, but we don't know if they're the same person. And the second limitation is that outcome information is absent. We do not know if they are being convicted of the charges, if the charges are not being prosecuted, or which charges, if any, are being completed in juvenile court. The second data requirement we have is for the juveniles charged, convicted, and sentenced as adults. What you're seeing here are 4 different data elements we're required to collect, and beneath it in italics is anything we are currently collecting, and I'll explain more about that source. So the requirements are the number of juveniles charged, convicted, and sentenced as adults, the outcomes of cases involving juveniles charged as adults, the number of juveniles housed in each state correctional facility or local correctional facility, and the length of sentence for each juvenile sentenced as an adult. What we have received so far has been from the Administrative Office of the Courts. This has been aggregate data for fiscal years 23 and 24, and that data has allowed us to look at the number of charges and number of cases, the outcomes of cases disposed within those fiscal years, and some sentencing information from the circuit court. This is a static image of a dashboard that we are currently developing using the data we receive from the Administrative Office of the Courts. This is not on our website at the moment. It does include data related to the juveniles charged, convicted, and sentenced, and it's separated into 2 pages. One is for the charges and cases that are filed and their dispositions, and the second, which is what you're seeing here, is the charge information. So the charged information we have is only for the circuit court, but on this page we break down the number of charges by which offense was being committed, the statute that was involved for that crime, and the different section of the criminal law. In terms of our findings for fiscal year 24, so looking at it, we had approximately 17,000 charges filed, which was nearly split between the district and the circuit court. Of the charges, since we only have filings are for the fiscal year, dispositions are anything that took place within the fiscal year. So they may be those that were in fiscal year 24, or they could have been charges filed from earlier years. So we cannot compare those. But we do know that within fiscal year 24, about 7,600 charges were disposed, with the vast majority coming from the circuit court, about 83%. For cases filed, we did have approximately 2,000 cases filed in 2024 or fiscal year 2024, with a majority coming from the district court, and only 223 cases were convicted in that time frame, with all but 4 from the circuit and only 4 for the district. Looking at counties with the most conviction of cases, since we were not able to link back the number of open cases with the number of convicted cases, we can't say what portion of cases were convicted by county, but we can say what portion of convicted cases took place in each one. So we know that the counties with the most convictions were Baltimore County, Prince George's County, and Montgomery County. The counties with the most cases filed during the time period were Prince George's, Baltimore City, and Baltimore County. On the second slide, we have the most common charges, and this was for the circuit court, and these are for charges that were convicted, where we saw firearm possession, assault second degree, and assault first degree, which is similar to what we were seeing as juveniles being charged as adults from the data from CJIS. We also have the most common charge dispositions, and these varied by district court and circuit court. For the district court, the most common disposition was to not be prosecuted, with the second most common being forwarded to juvenile authorities. And between these 2 categories, they made up over 99% of charges. And for the circuit court, the most common was being waived or remanded to juvenile court, which is 2 separate paths, followed by not prosecuted, which also made up more than 90% of the charges.
That previous slide, can you go back to that for a second? This isn't specific to juveniles, is it? There were 16,837 juveniles tried. Were there?
This is the number of charges that were filed against a juvenile. So it doesn't mean the majority of it. We saw that like 99% of that was not prosecuted or being dropped. But
And is this again charges, not necessarily cases?
yes, anything here. Let me move my mouse around a little better. I think I can grab a highlighter. 1 second. Everything here is for charges. Sorry that this is an unpleasant shape.
Yeah.
And the other information on the page is specific to cases.
Okay, got it. Sorry about that.
Thank you for asking the question. Any other questions on this slide?
Well, yeah, but I'm still, again, this is why I was asking about holding these for later.
No, go ahead. Go ahead now.
It's sort of like, I'm trying to, it's the case, it was the cases side that was confusing to me, actually. Like, so there's 1,900 cases filed in FY 2024, but on slide 4, it shows the number we're familiar with, 932. But I'm trying to understand the difference between these two.
It's a very good question, and this is a newer bill, so we just got this data set about a month ago, so we're still trying to, if at all possible, do an apples to apples comparison, knowing that I know that CJIS is going to respond to when a juvenile is fingerprinted, and then I don't know, it's 2 different data sets. I don't know that we necessarily can compare them. We're just trying to get the complete picture, and maybe the court's data is going to be the entity that has the complete picture, because we're trying to get all the cases that start in juvenile and are waived up, and those that start in adult and are waived down, and that's what we're trying to figure out here.
Okay.
And we still don't know, even from this, which you'll find out in the limitations, is this is down to the case level, which is nice, but we still don't know how many of those cases could involve the same youth. We still don't have this down to the youth level yet.
Right.
Even from this data that we've received now.
I think why I'm asking is because when you earlier presented the slide 4, the dashboard we're familiar with, in my head I was going, are we often overstating the number of charges against kids, because it was unclear from that whether multiple offenses could be in the same charge. So a kid could be charged with 5 different offenses and they'd all be listed in that dashboard.
Yes.
Which would make it seem like there were fewer than 932 charges or incidents where kids were charged as adults. This, though, is like double that number.
Well, I would also say that some of those district court cases are probably being waived to circuit court. So there could be, these could be duplicates as well. This is just our first snapshot at looking at this. I think that we still don't know. We would love to be able to link the district court and the circuit court cases, and we got aggregate level data, so there's no way to do that right now.
Okay.
I have a related questions. Is the outcomes, does that include cases that are still pending, or is it complete cases? Is the 223 going to go up once more cases go and finish?
We don't have information on those that one of our exports was cases convicted. It was plainly a table that said, here's your jurisdiction. This was the fiscal year. This is the number that were convicted. So we don't have how many were in progress. We only have, for the case level, we only have that outcome.
But John, remember, there would be kids being convicted during this time period who were charged the previous year, just like there will be kids charged this year that won't be convicted until the next year. I don't know that works itself out, but it's just important to remember that.
But in terms of like, what is 223 a percentage of? If it's of completed cases, then that's a useful, very low percentage that actually were convicted. But if there's still a lot pending, then it may change and it may not be as accurate.
Yeah, we don't have a number to compare the 223 to. We can compare it to the previous year, but we don't have like a larger pie to compare it to.
And I just want to say on behalf of the process, many charges initiate at the district court, very serious charges, and those charges are then indicted at the circuit court. And so the most serious of charges that begin at the district court will always end up, if charged, at the circuit court. So those would be probable duplicates.
That's a great point, and I am gonna don't jump ahead yet, Bree. I'm just jumping ahead in my mind. We're gonna talk about what we're going to ask of the courts, because we realize sending us aggregates is not giving us the picture. We actually, and we're gonna probably enter into some type of MOU with them, but we actually want to trace one youth throughout that process. So we know that this one youth started in district court, it was waived to circuit court. Here's the outcome of that particular case involving that use. So we're hoping to get there. We're just not there yet, but we do have a slide that's going to dive into that a little bit more. But
Jeffrey, just so you know, from the DJS side, I have a number of youth with district court and circuit court numbers and unique IDs that you could use for that purpose, that we already know their outcomes.
Perfect. So if we can, okay, great. We can have that discussion more. Just so you're all aware on this committee, not to get into all the boring, gory details, but we do have a monthly call with John's team where we just kind of hash out progress that we're making with collecting this data. This has really been an effort that we've been involved in for many years, and we're making progress, but there's still much work to be done on this.
I'm going to continue to the next one if anyone doesn't have questions at this stage, and we can answer more questions as we continue the presentation. So this slide is giving the charges and the outcomes. We were just touching on outcomes where they were differing by district and circuit court, and we saw that majority is not prosecuted or being sent back for juvenile court, and only 3.8% of charges across what we were seeing with that 16,837 are being convicted. That's 0.4% of the district court charges and 4.5% of the circuit court charges. The chart that's displayed here that may be a bit difficult to see, I'm not sure how clearly it comes through in the call, is just breaking that down by different groups. So on the far right, we have not prosecuted. On this 1 second from the right is those involving juvenile court or another, which could be other kind of pending outcomes. Guilty is here in the middle, not guilty, and something that was not applicable.
But that 45% is our best case. Again, we don't really know the true number, but that's our best case of those cases that are being waived back down to the juvenile court.
And guilty includes pleas and convictions, I assume.
Yes. Yeah, we don't have any plea information in the data that we received, but if they were, we have a listing of what is included within guilty if you'd like more detail on it, but it would include that. It would include anything like probation. It would include pleas, yes.
But does that mean also that almost half of them are dismissed or null pros?
Yes.
Well, half of what? Are you talking about cases?
Charges.
Or
Charges.
Yes, charges, and it's of that full, let me go back to the previous one.
What was
Of
it,
that
18,000? Yeah.
17-ish thousand, 16,837.
So if somebody was charged with 3 things
Mhm.
and 2 of them were dismissed, but 1 of them kept going. Does
We
that mean-
unfortunately can't determine that from the data that we received since it was all aggregate, but our intention is to request that disaggregated data that would allow us to know if a case was being convicted and then outcomes for individual charges within that case.
And then we could use like a hierarchy-based system on a case. So even if there were 10 charges, they got 1 conviction, we would count that case as a conviction, and then not guilty would follow, then not prosecuted, waived to juvenile, whatever those outcomes are. We can track that at the case level.
Yeah, it would also be important to track if they were charged with 10 things, 2 of which were auto waiver offenses and 2 of which were misdemeanors, and they got convicted of the misdemeanors. Like, we need to know that too. It's not.
We could with our, assuming our pie in the sky data request that we're going to put together, that will be in there. Whether or not we can get it remains to be seen, but that is in our request, which we're going to elaborate a little bit more on.
Cool.
Okay. And the last slide we have related to this data set is the limitations of it. So some of these are things we've already touched on. Other ones I'm just going to go into more detail. First, the data are at the charge and case levels. They are aggregated and don't indicate how many charges are taking place per case or which charges are co-occurring. And we also don't have any of the individual level data or demographics. We only have charge descriptions for charges that were convicted. We do not know what charges were going through and were being dismissed. We only have those that someone was convicted of. Charge information, so at this time, is only being provided as the statute, such as CR 3203, and may apply to multiple offenses when there are different crimes within that statute, resulting in uncertainty about the specific charge. On the previous slide, under the most common charges, there was one for unknown. Those were instances where it could not be determined based on the information that we received. Data on filings are specific to the fiscal year, while data on outcomes include cases and charges filed or disposed. So we cannot compare those. This is where we were seeing that 223 cases were convicted, but we don't know what that's out of. We don't know how many active cases there were during fiscal year 24. Jurisdiction was not provided for the convicted charges with descriptions. And then we also saw some discrepancies with the total number of charges for those that were convicted in that data set and those that were being marked as a conviction through someone being found guilty. Our next steps are to request the disaggregated data from the Administrative Office of the Courts. The data fields that we're currently identifying to request are the court system, whether it's a district or circuit case, the jurisdiction, the date the incident took place, and the date of charge of filing, and anything related to a transfer hearing, that's whether it takes place, the hearing date, disposition, etc. Unique identifiers for the person, including an ID for them, their age at filing or date of birth, and race, ethnicity, and gender. and then information specific to the case and charges, looking at the case number and charge number, and the charge description, CJIS code, and offense classification. Beyond that, we would be looking for different information related to case outcomes, looking at case outcome, a charge outcome, any plea if it was entered, what date the disposition was, what their age was at that time, and information related to sentencing, including the length, and if probation was also included.
Can I ask if there's going to be a request for the juvenile case if it was transferred, and case outcomes, including disposition date and juvenile disposition, etc.?
I believe it's our intention that with the petition ID to be received, that is something that the Department of Juvenile Services, and please correct me if I'm wrong, would have that we'd be able to link the data through.
That's correct. Although it wouldn't hurt to ask, get it directly from the courts too. Ours is all secondhand from our case managers.
We will note that to request their juvenile records as well. Thank you very much.
So the intent would be to kind of finalize our ask. We sent this to the courts once, and then they sent us back the aggregate level. So I think we just need to go a little more detailed, work out an MOU. We'll work with DJS, make sure that we're all asking for what we want, what this commission wants and what DJS wants. So we have one specific ask, and then we can work out the MOU if it's just between us and GoCap, if it has to be a 3-party MOU between DJS as well, so that they could get some type of identifier and provide their data. We can make this work so we can get the best data set possible for this.
The next part of our presentation is to be sharing the dashboard. Does anyone have questions related to these slides before moving on to the dashboard?
How are we on time, Ainsley?
If we want to maybe run through the dashboard quickly, I think that would be good. I just want to make sure that we have time for the other presentation as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Stop sharing to share a different screen. Okay. This is the Juveniles Charged as Adults dashboard that's posted to our website. I will send this link through in the chat in just a moment. If you go to the page, this was described in the presentation. We're just breaking down the different parts of information that we do receive from CJIS. So this is where you're able to choose to view different information. Thanks, Ainsley. For different fiscal years, you can choose to view all of them at once, where it's going to sort by the number of charges for that year. You can select a specific time period as well, and you can do comparisons with it. All the data are interactive, so if you were to select to view 17-year-olds over here, you're going to see what offenses were being committed by 17-year-olds, what the race of 17-year-olds were, and what the sex of 17-year-olds were. And the same can be done for different groups as well. So you can see for African-American youth, or you can look for females, and you can also combine across different ones. So we see here that there were females. This is data specific to African American females, and this is data specific to white females. There's lots of interaction. Go ahead.
You beat me to it. Just go ahead. I was going to comment on those infographic boxes, but go ahead.
At the top, we have the violent offenses. So this is, again, based on criminal law section 14101. And we have it linked here so that you're able to go into for more of that information. And we have the exclusionary offenses, which we also have information here that will, if you click here, break down what's being included inside exclusionary offenses. And those are based on age and the crime. So for those who are 14 and older, it's including first-degree murder, rape, and sex offense, or any attempt or conspiracy. And for those who are 16 and older, it's including various violent offenses and firearm offenses. And depending on time, Ainsley, just let me know. We can also take a look at anything specific you may have a question about.
If anybody has any questions, I think we can answer those.
I just want to clarify, when we look at these, when we look over juveniles charged as adults offense by category, those firearm possessions might overlap with a robbery, right? So the same kid can be counted multiple times depending on how many charges there were.
Yes, we just can't say if they are the same kid or not. We have data on the number of charges, but we do not have data on the number of juveniles.
But I guess it's not clear if it's number of, that's I think what I'm trying to understand. Is it number of charges or is it number of offenses for which there was a charge? So if there are 5 offenses in the same charge.
There could be. We don't know for sure, but yeah, it is charged. We tried to clarify. So we have it framed as, I know it gets a little jargony with the youth charged as adults. So we say offenses for youth charged in adult court. I guess, yeah, I guess it is charges. We put offenses. Does it make more sense if we change offenses to charges?
I think,
yeah.
I think this is a question like, I know John's here and DJS in their data, they like will show on the same page, they'll show sort of like the top charge, like, right, the top charge. So how many cases were there the top charge was whatever, and then all the charges.
And unfortunately, we don't know that yet.
Right.
Even for the court data, we don't know yet until we get that MOU finalized and we get the data down to the case level, that we can set the hierarchy based on the severity of the offense.
Right.
So, is it valid to say that based on what we've seen, we may charge a lot of people go through the process, and then at the end, there's very few people that we're actually providing services for?
Well, there's very few people that we're convicting in adult court. Let's start with that one first. Like the Vera data from several years ago showed about 5% of the assault 1 youth who are automatically tried as adults get an adult court conviction. Now that may be a good thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a question is like, did we need the 138-day wait to get to that result, or could we have gotten to that? Apropos to the specific committee's role, is there some way to get to that outcome, if that is the outcome in 95 out of 100 times, more quickly? So like you said, Susan, we get to the good stuff quicker.
Right.
And the good stuff could be liberty, because the facts didn't bear that out, or it could be rehabilitation if there's a delinquency adjudication. But how can we get there sooner so we don't spend a lot of money detaining kids, and we also have them getting to the point where they're turning their lives around more quickly and not forgetting what the hell they were in for?
Right. I mean, this
and not missing a
seems
year of
like
school.
a very big funnel that at the end is very small, and we've got to figure out a way to get to that small part quicker and more effectively for the kid and for public safety.
And also everywhere along the way, massive resources are being utilized. Prosecutors are prosecuting, defense attorneys are defense attorneys, shrinks are shrinking. I cannot hire enough psychologists to do these reports, and I don't have enough psychologists to provide services. I could do cognitive behavioral therapy for every kid in detention with the 15 psychologists I now have doing TOJ reports, transfer of jurisdiction reports, for kids everybody knows are going to get transferred at the end of it. Now, maybe there's a few that we don't know, but by and large, we know those gun possession cases, which are the number one, or the fist fights where a kid, got charged for assault 1 because he bloodied somebody's nose. A whole bunch of them are coming back, and we're spending a lot of court, prosecutor, defense, DOJ, psychologist time on them.
I have to say that the suggestion that kids are getting charged with first-degree assault for a bloody nose, I would push back hard against. And I also want to point out that we do need to focus on getting data regarding the case number, because looking at the charges is so wrong. There may well be 20 charges in one case. And as I said before, it starts from a police officer who's charging everything that they believe they have probable cause for, and that's at the district court. And then there are layers of evaluation that go through from a prosecutor's office in determining whether or not to indict that case. And even when a prosecutor indicts, they indict on numerous charges. And in the end, if there is a plea agreement, it's likely that of those 20 charges or 10 charges or 5 charges, that there's just one conviction. So to look at the number of charges is almost useless in my opinion. And I think that the number of cases is much more useful in terms of evaluating how many numbers there are of kids charged as adults.
And I appreciate that, Judge. That's
Weatherby.
exactly what we're trying. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking over somebody.
No, I'm just also, do we overcharge? Does that show that we're overcharging?
Yes. I would disagree with that. No.
I agree with Judge Weathersby on all of the points that she has said so far. And I will say, at least in Anne Arundel County, I can't speak for all other counties, but our prosecutors, regardless of what is charged in the citation, are the ultimate ones that decide on what charge goes through to the courts. And a bloody nose is not an assault in the first degree. It's a lot more of a standard for that. And sometimes when we charge more things, it's just because we don't have enough information, but we definitely in Anne Arundel County at least don't take charging a juvenile as an adult lightly by any means.
So I don't want to die on the hill of the bloody nose, so I'll yield to folks who actually are in court more frequently. Regardless of what that starts out as, what the actual behavior of the child is in that case, the overwhelming majority of the times, they're not ending up with an adult conviction. And I would urge us not to, because I suspect if the public defenders were to speak, they would raise a couple of cases where a kid had an umbrella and that was the deadly weapon, or a bar of soap. I mean, we could all go to the most extreme cases where an assault one was a maiming on one side or an umbrella on the other side. All I'm saying is the overwhelming majority of times, whether we count them as charges or cases, the kids are not resulting in an adult court conviction. And I would like us to figure out a way to get to that result without prejudging whether that result is the right or wrong one quicker. Because right now, the resources we're expending on it are enormous, and it doesn't benefit public safety and it doesn't benefit the kids.
Well, and I want to point out another thing here. Vinny, you bring up an excellent point that your workers are overwhelmed doing reports for transfer hearings. And I think that everybody should look at that in terms of whether that is the appropriate agency for doing those evaluations. Frankly, it's not necessarily required. There's no shall language in terms of courts ordering your agency to conduct those evaluations.
Yeah. Yep. And I think in many of those cases, the public defenders then go hire a psychologist to also do a report so that they have an expert. So
that's right.
And that it all takes time, and it's such a big.
The other thing that you're pointing out is how important it would be whether that child remains in adult court or in juvenile court to get services early and often.
Yep.
So
Ainsley, I don't know if this is what you're going to say, but I think we do have to move on to the Sentencing Project report. Jeffrey and Brianna, thank you so much. You know, the last thing that I'll say, because I do think that we'll as a group, as a work group, we'll debrief after we've fully digested these presentations. But you know, the cost in terms of evaluators and detention is in the tens, 20s, $30 million. And we can talk about the fiscal impact later, but we're definitely talking about in the tens of millions, unless Secretary, you disagree with me.
Do not disagree.
All right, thank you so much again. And Josh, you're still here, Josh. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so I seem to be sharing my wrong window here because you're seeing all of my notes. So give me 1 second here to make sure that I am presenting what I want to present. Thank you for your patience. Is that and okay. So is everyone getting to see a lovely blue crab on screen? Excellent. Thank you. My name is Josh Rovner. I'm the Director of Youth Justice with the Sentencing Project. I've been here since 2014, and I've been Director of the Youth Justice Team since 2022. TSP advocates for effective and humane responses to crime that minimize criminalization of youth and minimize imprisonment. And we do that because harsh responses are often counterproductive, harming the well-being of children and adolescents and often making it more likely that they'll reoffend and therefore harm public safety. Much of the research confirms our common sense about what makes teenagers different from adults and different from younger children. They're impulsive, they lack respect for authority, they value risk-taking, they're bad at understanding the consequences of their actions. And all of this was well understood before brain scans, before fMRIs confirmed it to be true. I often wonder what my teenage kids are thinking. My parents often wondered what I was thinking. My parents, from what I understand, though, were perfect angels who never made any mistakes in their teenage years or beyond. And I say that obvious joke because the core challenge that I face in my job is the assumption that today's kids are worse than ever when all of the available data show that that's not true. Adolescents' arrest rates are about 75% lower than they were when I was in high school in the mid-90s. And that's dropped by drops in actual offending and other risky behaviors. However, mental health indicators are much worse, including suicidal thoughts and levels of anxiety. It's hard to be 16. Thankfully, adolescence is not a chronic condition. People age out of these behaviors and attitudes, and that shows up in age crime curves that show that offending generally decreases with age as adolescents mature into adulthood. So I really want to hammer this home, that this issue has been studied thoroughly in Maryland and elsewhere. In 2021, the Maryland's Juvenile Justice Reform Commission recommended eliminating all automatic charging. They joined the list of experts that you see on screen arguing against automatic charging. And I'll be very brief here. There's 3 reasons why that's true. First, youth who are charged as if they were adults are more likely to reoffend. Second, the process is more time-consuming and thus more expensive. And third, youth who are charged as adults are at greater risk of harm while in adult facilities. None of this is up for debate. Maryland has discussed this for months, if not years, and experts around the country have confirmed it. The evidence is there. We have just opted not to act on it. There's a foundational question about why some youth are considered to be juveniles for legal purposes and others are not. It may seem obvious that 18 is the place to draw a line between juvenile and adult court, but that's not true everywhere. Today, 4 states, the ones that are highlighted in red, consider all 17-year-olds, regardless of the charge, to be adults when they are arrested. As recently as 2009, there were 12 states that were part of that list, including 2 states that counted 17 and 16-year-olds, drawing a line at age 16. Now, keep in mind that in those states, young people were not allowed to vote or sign a legally binding contract, but in court, the state pretends they are adults. You'll hear me use the phrase youth charge as if they were adults because we don't carve out teenagers from our laws in other settings. Like, no matter how well my daughter did on her advanced placement test for US government, we still don't let her vote. No matter how closely my son reads the sports page or how well he does in math, we still don't let him gamble on sports. But we've decided to make an exception in the criminal justice system, that there are things that a teenager can do that allow the state to pretend that they are an adult. That should make us uncomfortable, no matter how rare or common the practice is, no matter what the data show, and no matter whether it quote unquote works. We're still talking about people who we don't trust with a full driver's license. There are other pathways to adult court other than the jurisdictional boundaries that I discussed on that last slide. Second are automatic charges and prosecutorial waivers. Those are cases that start in adult court not simply because of the age of the offender, but because of a set of circumstances, generally the age of the youth plus the initial charge. In some states, that decision is left entirely up to the prosecutor, and some states, there's no discretion whatsoever. Some states use both of those pathways. Lastly are judicial waivers. Judicial waivers are in operation in most states, including Maryland. They're the only pathway in 6 states: California, Hawaii, Kansas, Missouri, Oregon, and Texas. And I need to call out that in only 2 of those 6 states is there a blended sentencing scheme. I bring that up because every time that this list is brought before the state legislature, the States Attorneys Association insists that all 6 states must have blended sentencing schemes. 2 of the 6 have blended sentencing schemes. Now, about 3,000 cases a year are waived upwards following a hearing in juvenile court. In a country as large as ours, it may be surprising to you that it's only 3,000 cases. Now, first, in many states, serious charges automatically start in adult criminal courts and thus aren't part of that 3,000. But secondarily, juvenile courts handle serious charges with regularity. Nationally, there are about 50,000 offenses categorized under the Violent Crime Index sent to juvenile court every year. That's 50,000 youth charged with an offense where the most serious charge is in the Violent Crime Index. Of those 50,000 youth, only 3% of them are waived to adult court by a juvenile court judge. Most of those cases are in fact resolved in juvenile court. Now, automatic charging is a complicated topic to look at nationally because there are so many dimensions upon which a young person can have their case sent to adult court, especially start in adult court. It's very difficult to draw the kind of map that I showed at the beginning with the jurisdictional boundaries. One dimension for automatic charging is age. Some states have no minimum age or a very low minimum age at which a youth can be charged as if they were an adult. Wisconsin is one of those states, for example, a place where a 10-year-old with severe learning disabilities allegedly, and I would even say probably, killed his mother. Today, almost 3 years after his arrest, he has yet to stand trial, first because of the time-consuming waiver process, and second because he is entitled to a fair trial. That trial, however, will take place in criminal court. He lost his reverse waiver hearing, again, at age 10. Another dimension is the list of charges. There are states, such as Virginia and Rhode Island, that limit automatic charging to a very short list of very serious charges. Other states, including South Carolina, have a complicated set of circumstances, such as multiple prior adjudications on serious charges, plus another serious charge pending. Maryland, on the other hand, has a very long list of automatic charges, generally applicable to 16 and 17-year-olds, with a shorter list for those 14 and older. The history of how we got here differs by state as well, though we did see significant growth of charges sent to criminal court in the 80s and 90s, in what's sometimes called the super predator era. Though the super predator theory has been debunked, many of the harsh laws that were passed in its wake are still on the books. Maryland's story starts much earlier than that, however. We were actually the second state to carve out an offense. It was murder, and we did so in 1945. Pennsylvania was the first, Mississippi was the third. But as of 1986, so 40 years or so after that initial change, Maryland was only one of 14 states that automatically charged youth as if they were an adult based solely on the offense. And it was generally murder when that happened. Maryland, on the other hand, used those 40 years to repeatedly add charges. So armed robbery became a so-called adult charge in 1973. As of 1986, only 6 states had done the same. So throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Maryland repeatedly added offenses to its list. And as of today, as you have heard again and again, Maryland automatically charges youth charged with any one of 33 separate offenses into adult criminal courts. That is an exceptionally unusual number. And as a result of that high number of charges, Maryland has the second highest rate of youth sent to adult court when one controls for population, with Alabama leading the nation in this shameful statistic. By count, only Alabama and Florida rank higher, although Florida's population is about 3 times higher than ours. Shown in the graph are the rates of youth charged as adults in several states, and you can see Maryland is the second highest, highlighted in red. Obviously, a number of states are missing from that graph. That's mostly because most states are not as transparent as Maryland is with its data, and we really deserve credit for doing so. But the most obvious one for our purposes is Virginia. Virginia, instead of automatically charging, uses a process of confirming probable cause and that the facts of the case align with the charge. They call this a certification hearing, and it takes place in juvenile court. It's not a trial. Virginia reports the number of cases wherein certification was requested, but not the outcome of that hearing. Now, if 100% of the certification requests were granted, Virginia would be about where Rhode Island is on the graph. I'll give everyone a minute to find Rhode Island. It's between Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. That bar is about 7 times lower than Maryland's bar. In other words, Maryland is 7 times more likely at minimum to automatically charge young people as if they're adults compared to our neighbors to the south. So let's turn to the difference that was discussed so often in the last presentation between the initial charge and conviction. In January, the Bureau of Justice Statistics released a report on what happens to youth charged in adult court. Now, I want you to notice that this is a report that was just released in January 2025, based on data from 2014. The 16-year-olds in this report are now 27 years old. So think about that as we keep discussing whether we need more data or whether this needs to be studied further. We have plenty of data already, and I don't want us to use data as an excuse to have inaction. But let me show you what this report from BJS shows. We have data on almost 38,000 youth charged in adult court in 23 states over the course of a year. This includes all of the pathways into adult court, and 2/3 of those youth were in the states with an age boundary other than age 18. Of the 38,000, 8,530 were actually convicted in adult court. In other words, looking nationally, 22% of the time, an adult charge led to an adult conviction. The data that I was looking at, it was the VERA data, showed that in Maryland, we were looking at 17%, and I now see from GoCap's presentation that that is a vast overestimate. There's a couple errors on this slide based on the information that I just heard. But the reason for this low conviction rate, first of all, reverse waivers frequently send youth back to juvenile court, where I would argue the cases should have begun anyway. And others don't result in conviction due to actual innocence, as well as charge being dropped when there's insufficient evidence to proceed. Again, the research that I looked at showed it was 30%. Today I learned it was 50% of the time the charges are dropped, which isn't to say that there is not an incredible residue from the trauma of going through adult court processing and probably waiting in an adult jail. I would hardly say that nothing happened. In fact, we've done a lot of damage to those children for whom the charges were issued and then dropped. But let's dive deeper into those who were convicted And note that according to this report, that adult convictions result in incarceration, jail, prison, confinement in juvenile facilities, split sentences that include incarceration and probation, less than half of the time. Other forms of punishment for youth charges if they were adults include probation only and court costs / restitution. So please keep those results in mind when looking at the following graph. It was created using that dashboard that we saw before. The graph shows Maryland youth charged in adult court over the last 10 years, split into automatic and discretionary cases. Overwhelmingly, as you've heard, they are Black boys. More than 80% of the total are Black and more than 90% are male. We do not have ethnic data on that dashboard, so we don't know what proportion of the white and Black youth are Hispanic. We only know their race. Now, the numbers in blue are mandatory waivers, and the numbers in dark red are discretionary. In Maryland, youth in adult court are generally there because it is an automatic adult charge, roughly 5 out of 6. So much of the discussion has been about automatic waivers, but I'd like us to spend some time thinking about the discretionary ones as well. Now, over the last 10 years, 85% of youth were sent there due to automatic charging, 815 automatic waivers. If one takes a look at the most frequent reasons for the automatic waivers, the counts are on screen. Looking down, you see firearm possession being the most frequent, followed by first-degree assault, armed robbery, first-degree murder, carjacking, and then 64 charges, including places where the dashboard says the charge is unknown, and then rape, firearm use, second-degree murder, first-degree rape, kidnapping, and manslaughter. No one would say these are not serious charges. Now, I want to talk about discretionary waivers a bit, because the bill that is pending in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee and is going to be heard in the House Judiciary Committee on Wednesday, the next Wednesday, that's SB 422 and HB 1344, shortens the list of automatic charges from 33 to 7 and raises the mandatory age to age 16 for all charges. The bill and the one that preceded it have often been mischaracterized by its opponents and by the media, often stating that reform would mean that no youth would ever be charged as if they were adults. I got particularly exercised by a poll conducted by Gonzalez Research and published in the Washington Post in October 2023 that plainly misstated current law and the proposed reforms. The bill put forward by Senator Smith and Delegate Tolles, as well as comprehensive reforms that would end auto charging entirely, would still allow cases to be waived upwards. I'm not fond of making predictions, but were the number of automatic adult cases to drop, the number of discretionary ones would surely increase. And we know this to be true because discretionary waivers are really quite common. As car thefts increased over the last couple of years, thanks to Kia and Hyundai designing a car that was uniquely easy to steal, 33 youth were sent to adult court on motor vehicle theft charges. That means state's attorneys won their waiver hearing. 33 of them in 23 and 24. And that's up from 12 cases in 2021 and 2022 when fewer cars were being stolen. I really want to be clear about this. Eliminating automatic charging does not eliminate transfer entirely. We would see more requests for discretionary waivers in juvenile court, and we would see more youth waived upwards following a hearing in juvenile court. Now, there are many differences between juvenile and adult courts, probably too many to get into, but we've been talking a lot about process, and that's what this slide gets to. I really want to start with the fact that youth who are charged as adults are often held in adult jails. They're often held in solitary confinement, doing untold damage to their long-term well-being. Solitary confinement is basically a form of torture, and we shouldn't find it an acceptable response for anyone, but particularly for teenagers. But second, let's look at how long the process in juvenile court takes versus adult criminal court. The process I understood to take a transfer hearing averaged 147 days. We heard today that it's 125 days. The math that I had was a 5-month waiting period. It looks like it's closer to 4. But please recognize that transfer requests are granted in the vast majority of cases. That's the typical outcome. So whether it's 5 months or 4, we are just waiting for the outcome of that case. When a case starts in juvenile court and the state's attorney requests that the teenager be waived upwards to criminal court, that process takes 27 days on average. You can imagine how inefficient this is, but you can see it in black and white data with math. The Department of Legislative Services estimates that implementing the compromise reform, that is SB 422/HB 1344, would save the state $17 million per year once fully implemented, mostly because the current system is so incredibly inefficient. The shorter lengths of stay would allow DJS to close the Hickey School, which opened in 1910. Hope you'll understand why I tripped over that. It's hard to imagine that we're still talking about something that opened in 1910. So third, let's take a look at how long it takes adjudicated youth to receive services. Among adjudicated youth committed to DJS, it takes 97 days to receive services. I think we'd all agree that that is unacceptably long waiting period, and yet it is half the amount of time for the typical youth whose cases start in adult criminal court and is then transferred to DJS. Another thing worth addressing is the understanding that DJS already handles serious cases. 56% of the youth in juvenile detention on an average day are awaiting adult trial. And we also know, as we've discussed, serious cases are frequently waived back down. This is coming from the DJS Data Resource Guide for FY23, both this data point and the one above it. 409 cases waived back down and then served by DJS. That includes some pretty serious charges. That's 85 youth on first-degree assault, 58 on carjacking charges, 30 murder charges, 18 robbery. And that's just part of the 1,500 plus youth charged with crimes of violence and referred to juvenile court in 2023. There's an assumption, I hear this from politicians and from the media, that DJS shouldn't be handling the most serious cases. DJS does handle the most serious cases, as happens with departments of juvenile justice throughout the nation. So I'll leave there. I'll pause. I think this is a good time to go over any questions you may have and to continue the discussion. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for that. Ainsley, will all work group members be sent both of these presentations?
Yes. So in the link that I have pinned, I'll resend it again in the Dropbox. Both of these presentations are in there, as well as kind of a cost analysis of what it's costing the state for, continuing charging youth as adults in this way, as well as like some of those potential savings that Josh kind of went over a little bit of those if Maryland chooses to limit the practice.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yes, Susan and I asked for a cost analysis, and we thank GoCap for providing that a few days ago, and we'll make sure that all work group members have that as well. And then I would just ask all work group members to review all 3 of those presentations so that we can have a really robust debrief at our next meeting and start to talk about some takeaways from the information, as well as identifying some gaps in information, identifying the information, more information that we need to move forward. Susan, is there anything else you'd like to say before we close our first meeting?
No, I just want to thank our speakers. That was really helpful. And I agree that I think I don't want us to wait 2 years to get the absolute best data, because I don't know if we'll ever get it. And I think that we do have enough to really start thinking about how we can make recommendations to the full committee and what we can do about it. because really the time, it's just so expensive what we're doing now. And I don't think anybody is happy with the outcomes. So I think it's pretty clear what our charge is, and hopefully we can have a robust discussion about how to make some changes. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, and have a good weekend. Stay warm.
Bye.